was threatened to be fired if we didn't get it done by a certain date is inaccurate. So just want to put that on the record, and I've been clear with that in our response to those press reports. Secondly, Dr. Marks and I have been very clear from the beginning that we're going to maintain the integrity of the scientific process. We're going to let our scientists do their job and review and go through the thoroughness of that review, the gold standard, if you will. So we've done that. But we also recognize the urgency of the situation. And so we've said repeatedly, we will work as quickly as we can to come to a decision. And that's what we did. Has been reported, our team, the scientists, met after the VRBPAC meeting. They did come to the conclusion that the vaccine did meet our standard for effectiveness and safety. And as you know, before 7 a.m. on Friday, we issued a statement saying that we were working with the sponsor to move toward authorization. And again, our incredible team, heroic efforts, night and day worked to get this done and out the door, and I think did a superb job. And I'm really proud of their efforts because we understand the urgency of the situation. As Dr. Marks said, thousands of people are dying a day.
Our next question comes from Meg Carroll with CNBC.
Well, thank you. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about the special groups and considerations for people like pregnant and breastfeeding women and people who are on immunosuppressive therapies. How did you consider the recommendations for those groups, especially considering they were not included in the trials?
I'm going to start off and sound like a broken record, but this gets to the heart of the thoroughness of our review, the line-by-line assessment of the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, because these questions are very important to providers and all Americans. Dr. Marks, maybe the specifics?
Yeah, so there were not enough pregnant women in the trials, or women who became pregnant in the trials, to actually know and make any statement about that. So for pregnant women, for that matter, for children, younger children, we don't have data at this point. But for pregnant women and the immunocompromised at this point, it will be something that providers will need to consider on an individual basis for patients or for people.
Thank you. Next question comes from Carl Zimmer with New York Times.
Yes, hi. I would like to know, are you going to require that AstraZeneca finish its phase 3 clinical trial in the United States, which is only currently half enrolled, although that means, according to AstraZeneca, that they can't apply for an EUA until June, and that will affect the supply of vaccines in the United States?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's one where I can't speak to a product that's under development.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Hannah Coulter with Financial Times.
Hi, I just want to follow up on what Meg asked there. What advice would you give a doctor if a pregnant woman asks for the vaccine? What should they be considering?
Dr. Marks.
So I think this is one where I think you'd want to have it's from a provider to an individual, a consideration of the potential benefits and the potential risks, what we don't know about the vaccine versus what we do. And I think then if that conversation happens, I think the provider and that individual can make a decision about whether the benefits outweigh the risk, because certainly COVID-19 in a pregnant woman is not a good thing. So someone might decide that they would like to be vaccinated. But that's not, again, that's not something that we're recommending at this time. That's something we're leaving up to the individual.
And just to follow up further on that question, it's, again, getting back to our review and what we put in the documents out for the American people and providers, that level of detail to provide as much information supported by data and science to providers so that they can counsel patients and that patients are aware of the issues is so critically important. It's one thing that the US FDA uniquely does.
Thank you. Next question from Ryan Gabrielson with ProPublica.
Thanks for taking my question. To what extent has the FDA done on-site inspections of Pfizer's manufacturing sites? And has the process for this vaccine differed from past reviews?
To sort of give you an overview of the inspection process, we have a lot of different tools in the toolbox to ensure the quality and safety, and the fact that every lot of a vaccine, for example, or any medical product would meet our incredibly high standards. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, which we have used. And Dr. Marks, I don't know if you want to give more specifics.
Yeah, so for an emergency use authorization, we are not required to do the type of site inspections that we would for a biologics license application and a fully approved vaccine. That said, we relied on a combination of tools to ensure that we are very confident that these vaccines are being made in a manner that is consistent with the high quality that Americans have come to expect from vaccines taken to prevent disease.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Karen Weintraub with USA Today.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about the 16 and 17-year-old age group. I know there was a lot of discussion the other day. What can we say to parents to reassure them that their teenager is safe getting this vaccine?
Dr. Marks?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because there was, as you might realize, as you might have noted, some debate about that at our advisory committee meeting. And that's one of those places where we at FDA have a fair amount of history, some of which hasn't been in the public domain because we approve a lot of vaccines in the pediatric age range. And we're very used to extrapolating from adults or from older children into younger children. And based on everything we saw from looking at the data, we're very comfortable that the safety profile that was observed in 17 and 16-year-olds was acceptable. And although it wasn't quite as large as you might have seen in other groups, there was enough there to make us comfortable that the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks. After all, although what was said by some, 16 and 17-year-olds, they don't get really sick with COVID-19 very often, although I think if you're the parent of a child who does get sick and die from it, that you might be pretty upset. On the other hand, they are able to transmit quite easily if they're asymptomatic, as we've learned. And since some of those 16 and 17-year-olds, at least that I know of, are out there as checkout people or interacting with communities, it may be wise that we are able to vaccinate them. So we think the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Rachel Robin from Politico.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I wanted to follow up on the allergic reactions. I think you mentioned that those sites would be able to handle an allergic reaction. Is there any specific equipment that's required of them? And is that something that they all already have the capacity to do, or could that limit the number of sites? Thank you.
So I'm happy to take that one. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is helping with the vaccine rollout, is making sure that all sites have the basic supplies to take care of an allergic reaction. Those things include things like an epinephrine pen, diphenhydramine, also known by the brand name of Benadryl, and potentially a steroid called hydrocortisone. They'll make sure that those are available at sites giving the vaccine. They're basic equipment to have, and the idea is that will be present at all of the sites in order to take care of a potential issue. Hopefully, it'll just be there as a safety precaution.
Our next question comes from Emily Kopp with Roll Call.
Hi, I'm hoping you can explain for a general audience what efficiencies in the process helped this move along so quickly. Someone referenced not doing on-site inspections, but what else did FDA do to speed this along?
Well, again, let me be clear. We did not cut corners in our regulatory process. Dr. Marks and I and his team have been talking about this since the spring and early summer. As you know, we put out guidances in June as well as October around this, and we've been working with developers of vaccines from the very beginning, helping them sort of expedite the clinical and preclinical development process. So all hands on deck from Dr. Marks's team and the agency with respect to this from the very beginning, allowing for a seamless development process, which helped in the development of the vaccine, and then working very closely with the manufacturers and sponsors as they gathered the data and they decided to make an application. Dr. Marks and his team are to be congratulated for their heroic efforts because they had all hands on deck, had a lot of resources at their disposal, and worked night and day to get through this process in these applications. And there were a significant amount of efficiencies in those steps, including working closely with our U.S. government partners when appropriate. So really a major effort by all of the agency, but in particular Dr. Marks's center.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Peter Aitken with Fox News.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. You said there's going to be follow-up with safety and further reviews after the emergency use. If there was a potentially problematic complication that arose, what would the process be to handle that kind of issue?
I'm going to ask Dr. Marks to talk about the specifics around the follow-up with respect to the EUA, the authorization, but just to put a finer point on the question, from our perspective, we, in our guidances, really insisted upon the fact that there would be a very rigorous follow-up safety surveillance system. And Dr. Marks and his team have worked with other government partners, most notably the Centers for Disease Control, to help institute that. But I think Dr. Marks can answer specifically what might happen moving forward.
Yeah. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the FDA will be essentially we've now launched a continual process where we would be looking at safety events. And if we see something that rises to the place where the public needs to know about it, we're going to communicate it. We're going to communicate it once we know enough about it to be able to communicate coherently on it. But we will pursue finding out about such things with due diligence so that we can get the word out there as quickly as possible. So it will be a combined effort, and it will be an ongoing effort, and quite a large one as we see more and more people vaccinated.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Lauren Mascarenhas with CNN.
Hi, are you worried that the appearance of pressure on this process will impact people's willingness to get a vaccine, and are you working to counteract that in any way?
So the agency is very concerned about vaccine hesitancy. We are also aware that some feel that the speed with which this development and then regulatory process took place might give them concerns about the vaccine. But it's why we were very transparent. And Lauren, the way we've addressed this is to, number one, be very clear about the data and the science we would need, as Dr. Marks said in his opening remarks, to make a decision. Be very clear from the beginning what our processes would be, including having an open and transparent discussion, as we did with the VRBPAC meeting on the 10th of December, and following through on that. And then being very clear after a decision was made about the data and the science and the rationale behind a decision, as well as giving a very detailed description of what providers and people who receive the vaccine would need to have. So yes, it's a concern. We will continue. Dr. Marks and I have been meeting with many stakeholders, certainly with the press as well, to address any concerns that arise and to be very clear and transparent about the processes and the science and the data. We believe that transparency, as well as the rigorous scientific review that we've done, goes a long way to providing confidence and trust for the American people and FDA and this vaccine.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alicia Auld with Medscape.
Yes, hi. I wanted to ask you, given your remark, Dr. Marks, about vaccinating teens to prevent transmission, when will we know more about how the vaccine might impact viral shedding and transmission?
So it may take a few months before we start to have those data. Additional studies will be done, both clinical trials and observational studies that will help give us those data. Right now, we have to extrapolate what might happen from animal studies, so we'd like to have human data as quickly as possible. But those studies are going to be conducted during the coming months.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Drew Armstrong with Bloomberg.
Hi, I'm wondering what data transparency FDA can commit to in terms of how and when you'll be reporting any information on vaccination numbers or side effect profiles, any kind of real-time data the agency will be doing and making available to the public in addition to your study and then reporting that you would normally do on any kind of product like this.
Dr. Marks?
So the CDC and FDA are going to work together, as I've mentioned, and we have a website here that will post the types of surveillance that we're doing, that will post the types of surveillance studies. We have about 20 adverse events that we'll be looking for on an ongoing basis. If there's any signals in those, we will post those. Our goal here is to make sure that people know that we're doing our jobs to make sure that we look out for possible adverse events so that they feel comfortable rolling up their sleeve and taking the vaccine.
And Drew, you may have seen our statement, my statement from a couple weeks ago regarding transparency in the agency and EUAs. And we have made a strong commitment, our center directors and myself, to being transparent about it. We realize that is something that we will continue and need to continue to do during this pandemic because that helps build trust and confidence in our processes and our decision making.
Thank you. Our last question is from Meg Terrell with CNBC.
Thank you for giving me two. I'm just wondering about the delicate handling requirements of this vaccine. We've dedicated a lot of airtime and ink to the cold temperatures with which it has to be stored, the fact that it can only be out of the freezer for a minute, transferring it from the box to the deep freezer. Personally, my own doctor has even said she's nervous about this vaccine because it requires such delicate handling. So how convinced are you that every site will do this perfectly every time? There will be no degradation of the vaccine. And what do you want to tell the public about that?
So I'm going to let Dr. Marks talk about the specifics, but really important point because folks may not know, this is a core responsibility of the FDA to understand the conditions under which a product might be used and how it be used. And so this is something that our team has spent a lot of time looking at. Dr. Marks?
So we put forward the conditions that need to be adhered to. We try to make it very clear in the labeling, in this case, in the provider information sheet, how the vaccine will be handled. And I know that our colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Operation Warp Speed folks are making sure that things are in place to make sure that the cold chain is maintained. Now, once the vaccine, there is this bit of subtlety here that the vaccine needs to be stored at very, very cold temperatures. Once it's thawed, it can be kept in a regular refrigerator for a number of days. But we're pretty convinced that we can make this happen here. We've seen cold chains maintained in locations that are pretty rural or pretty rough. For instance, with vaccination campaigns in Africa. So we're hopeful that this is going to work out.
Well, thank you for joining us here today and participating in this press conference around the FDA's authorization of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. We invite you to visit our website at fda.gov for more information about the authorization. Thank you.